Hello, everyone. We're going to do this take two. All the time zones and computers are conspiring against To the Moon, Allison, but we are going to just fight on through the way we do as when we are romantasy heroines. You know, that's what we do. We fight through, we fight for our right to broadcast or whatever this is. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live and crazy episode of To the Moon, Allison's, with the top and trending works in fantasy, science fiction, speculative fiction, and romance. And I'm so excited to be joined by Stacey McEwan, best-selling fantasy author, who is literally from the future because she is already telling us what Monday is like. She's facing Monday while the rest of us are still hanging out in Sunday weekend land from Australia. Stacey, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. We made it.
We made it. Well, we've had some issues for people who don't follow me on social media. First off, go follow me on social media. But guess what? The internet has made that harder because like my Instagram just decided I don't exist anymore. And Stacey and I have been coordinating via Instagram to make sure we had time zones right. We didn't. My little converter had me off by an hour. So I was like, what are we doing? And then I moved everything. And then she was in the waiting room and I couldn't see her. So hopefully everything technology-wise will play nicely. First off, Stacey, there is no technology in your books, which I appreciate as someone who doesn't really like technology, because your books were about the Glacian Trilogy, which I've read all three of them now, and I'm just so excited to talk about ledge, chasm, valley, the one words that tell us, well, more or less the setting, if nothing else about what is happening here, and Dawson and her love and everything that's happening in the world of that. So Stacey, welcome to the show. And you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself, explain why you sound, Australian. Why do you sound so Australian right now?
Well, it sounds so Australian because I'm from Australia.
That's why.
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably all the explanation I can offer.
It's valid.
Thank you. What else can I say about myself? I'm 34. I'm a mum of two kids. I was formerly a primary school teacher. I hopped on TikTok one day and realized that BookTok and then Bookstagram and Book Twitter and all the book places existed. And I sort of grew a following from there, and I'd been writing books for a really long time. So I thought I might try to publish one. And social media kind of became my conduit for that. So I published, my debut, Ledge, published in 2022. And since then, I've published its two sequels, Chasm and Valley. And then I've got my next series, the first book of which comes out next year. So it's all going really rather well. And I'm no longer primary teaching. This is my full-time job now, which is super, super exciting. What else can I say about myself? I have issues.
You have issues. And you mentioned like all the TikTok and the book talk stuff. And so I have various groups of social media friends, some of which I've actually gotten to meet in real life. So I know they exist. Some of which are still kind of sketchy and might just be figments of they're either a bot or figment of my imagination.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
But a couple of them, when I mentioned you, they were like, oh my gosh, she's my favorite on TikTok. She's hilarious. So I think they're expecting a lot more slapstick in your books because you are hilarious on the TikToks.
I get that
and
a lot.
All that stuff. That I think that they're like, wait, these are books that actually have a plot and are serious and aren't just making fun of, because a lot of what you do on the TikTok is making fun of the tropes and making your poor husband go along with being the male lead in those things. It's like, yes, I need you to want me. Right now, show me with your eyes. and then he's just like, why do you do this to me? And you're like, because this is the thing. And I guess the nice thing is you now don't have to worry about balancing that or what happens if your primary kids find their teacher on social media doing these ridiculous things. Not an issue anymore because you are living the dream of full-time author. And I mean, you still have the kids. Those are still like the mom thing doesn't ever really go away because they're still like, feed us and figure it out.
Exactly. I haven't actually.
You don't have to worry about the teaching part. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I don't have to worry about the teaching part, which is fantastic. I no longer, which is a terrible thing to have happened to me, really, because now it's given me license to be even more unhinged online. Like before, I was pretty bad, but I mean, there was a boundary, you know, there was a boundary that I was very much not going to cross due to the fact that my vocation would not allow me to be that inappropriate. But now that nothing's holding me back,
oh dear,
I mean, yeah, who's to say? Like,
the constraints are off.
Yeah, exactly. I'm about to be cancelled any minute. Like any minute, it's going to happen. I can feel it.
I mean, there's always that line between funny and you've gone way too far. And I do think that, and like, my husband is a teacher, so I get it. Like, there are things where he's like, he comes home almost every day going, I said something I probably shouldn't have said. And almost all of them are very benign, but he's always worried about, and this is just in his class, but he doesn't go on social media. Like, the only time he's on social media is whatever I send him when I send him something stupid and I want him to see it. And he's like all the way across the room. So I rather than make him come over, I just like, this
you shouldn't have to journey.
Yeah, no.
I mean, you shouldn't have to journey that far.
Yeah, and it was probably one of those things that got me in trouble on Instagram, because like right now I still have access to the podcast channel account, but not my account. And I'm like, what have I done? Did I send something inappropriate? Was it the mice that are singing about medieval siege to the tune of Carol of the Bells? Because I mean, I thought it was all right.
CIA does not like that. I
don't think so. I don't know. But yes, now that you're not a primary teacher, you can have more heaving bosoms. Maybe not yours. You may not want that kind of reputation as an author.
Yeah, and also don't get me wrong, I'm an A cup, but if I was like a solid D cup, don't think that I wouldn't use that to my advantage.
If I had these assets, no, I'm the same. We had makeup on our show.
Do not think that I would not use them, because I would.
We don't have some of those gifts, and you know, we had Macabre on Vox Vomitus, and one of her covers for I want to say it was for A Likeable Woman, it may have been My Summer Darlings, I'm not sure which, had a woman in a blue bikini, and I'm like, oh, I have that. And Jennifer and Gordon's telling me, oh, wear that. I'm like, you don't understand. No one's going to pay to see that. Like, that's just not a thing. So I ended up wearing like my rash guard over it for most of it. But she's like, come on, do it. I'm going, no, you have boobs. I don't really. So it's
exactly. What we have is personality. Like, do you think that there's no way that we would be this charismatic if we had other things to compensate? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this takes work. It takes work to be this on all the time. Do you really think that we choose this? No, we wouldn't choose this.
And Jennifer gets there. She still has the other assets, but she also has a lot of trauma. So that works.
I know.
Just,
what a fucking show off, honestly.
She's not tall. So there's that. Like, she doesn't have the height. Well, like, I feel like, Stacey, you're probably taller than me because I'm only 5'2".
I'm definitely taller than you. But I'm not traditionally tall, but I'm not short.
You're like probably normal sized. You're not the person who goes into Aldi and starts climbing into the displays because stuff's up too high. And my kids are like, Mom, and I'm like, well, you're not any bigger than I am. And if they wanted me to reach,
shut up.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it's that, or I could put them like on my shoulders and have them grab. But then, you know, I'm like looking at dates on stuff while I'm up there. No one stopped me yet. So honestly, maybe they should stop being so, you know, heightist against people who are not tall enough.
Whatever that is. Yeah.
I don't think it's a thing. I mean, I know for people who actually have a legitimate disability, having things up that high is just not cool. But I understand that for most people, it's probably in reach. And I'm just like, help. And I don't.
They're looking at you like, well, why don't you jump? Allison, how about that? Why don't you jump?
If I jump, I come down badly. And like, now I've broken an ankle and like lawsuit. And they're like, stop that. So they don't want me to do that either. But honestly, I don't also have wings, which some of the characters in your books have. So
what honestly, a segue, honestly.
It's not a good one. But if I had wings, I would just be flying around the store. And that would be also really obnoxious to people because they'd just be hitting them and everything. But I want you to tell us a little bit about your series. And if there is anything like the one takeaway when we're saying, okay, the Glacian Trilogy, it's a romantasy, but it's not like other romantasies because...
because there's axes.
Because there's axes. I was just saying because there's snow, and I don't know enough about other romanticities, but I always feel like the coldness factor, like the fact that we are set in such a desolate location for a good chunk of this series is like, this is the defining thing, that you're so cold while reading these books. You should not read Stacey's books without like a mug of cocoa, and then apparently also an axe. I don't know how we're turning pages if we're holding an axe and cocoa. We will figure it out.
All right, well, you'd just be inside of an axe, maybe. No, so I had a really funny description thrown at me the other day by someone who had read the series, where they called it fucked up Winter Wonderland, and I kind of liked that. So I went, oh yeah, I like that. I had to describe the setting to someone recently who was doing some art for me, and they're sort of like, describe the setting of like the ledge, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I said, do you picture over the wall in Game of Thrones, like White Walker territory? Like,
that's it.
Does that not seem conducive to romance to you?
Super romantic. I mean, I think we're all thinking of like when Jon Snow gets up there and he's got about 8 layers of furs, and then they're trying to get it on, and it's like, hold on, I've got about 8 layers of furs to figure out. But obviously it worked, because I'm pretty sure he married his co-star. So obviously this is conducive to some sort of romance.
This is what I'm saying. I saw that and thought, I smell love in the air, is what I said.
Love it. Probably,
and then I made it happen.
First, that's fine. First don't usually smell great. But also then I would say, so there's a little bit of like the Elsa with like the dark magic related to the ice, because this is not just, okay, so we're out there. There's obviously the fantasy element. And I love, and this is one of the things that I really enjoy about fantasy series, is like, you do the perfect thing about introducing some lore, and the character only knows like this much of it. And then more characters know more of the lore. And so they correct your understanding of the history and how things really came about and what's really happening. And sometimes you go, ooh, I thought you were the bad guys, but maybe you're the bad guys, and maybe they're the bad guys, and maybe everyone sucks. Because there is a lot, by the time we're in the 3rd book, there is a lot of, I don't even know who I'm rooting for anymore, because I'm okay if you guys die, and I'm pretty sure that you guys have it coming to you, and I don't even know how you guys got here, but the redhead, she can stay. Everybody else, they just gotta. You guys, you are welcome to just leave. I don't know if you pitched the 3rd one is pretend Moses is, instead of crossing the Red Sea, he's crossing like below ice stuff, and everyone's bitching about everything, and there is no mana, because I feel like that could work too.
Yeah. And just to give a basic premise of the books before we get into Valley and that whole thing, because I'd love to talk about it, is basically my main character is stuck on this mountain shelf that she can't escape, and she's being held hostage there, along with a civilization of people, but she's being held hostage there by these winged creatures that are like half man, half bat, and that have powers. And the whole story revolves around Dawson's escape from the ledge, and then her goal, which is to kind of rescue everyone else from the ledge. And to do that, she ends up flying them into this big chasm that is encompassing the ledge, and tries to walk the chasm with all of these people, the civilization of people, in hopes that there's another side to the chasm and some sort of utopian place where they can settle and be free of the threat of the half man, half bat creatures called Glacians, and also all the people that were left in the kingdom on the other side in the valley, because they kind of sucked too.
They did
so
too.
So that's where we're sort of at with book 3, is Dawson, along with a contingent of her former fellows, kind of walking the length of the chasm, and everyone's just bitching and moaning about it. And she's like, well, I rescued you from the ledge, so why not show a little bit of gratitude? Exactly. What else do you want? Yeah. Really feel for her. I get a lot of messages from people saying that Dawson's being really silly in Valley. And to be fair, she is. She's making some very morally grey choices. And she's not being smart.
Well.
Yeah. But also she's like, well, she's a very reluctant hero, where she's like, I'm doing this because I think that it might be right. I have no idea how to be a hero, okay? Usually I just kill people with my axe.
Easier.
And now I'm supposed to be the savior.
Yeah, it's way easier to just
fumbling.
She's fumbling, but she's also in that hard position where she's like, I know stuff that other people don't, And I know that people won't just take me at my word about I know what's best. And so I'm not going to give them maybe all the information that I have, because I know they won't just follow the directions and shut up and follow me. So you're getting some of that aspect going on too. And then you also introduce some new characters that some of them we've seen before, some of them we've seen in tinier fragments, and we get these new backstories and all that. So Stacey, I don't know if you're a planner or a plotter or a pantser here, but how much of this book did you know when you were writing the first book as an end game, and how much of this you're like, well, now I'm here, I have to figure this out?
So I knew, I guess, what you would call the plot beats. So I knew the big things that would happen in the story. Usually I find that's how I sort of work, where I know the big points that need to occur throughout the entire series. And then I work out what's going to fit into one book or two books or three books. Yeah. Ledge was supposed to be a standalone. So I already had all these plot beats in my head. And then was like, this is going to be way too long. So it's like, okay, now it's a duology. And then sort of outlined the duology and saw a very clear place where Ledge might end, a second book could begin and then end, and then a third start. And I was like, okay, so I lied, it's a trilogy. So that was all in the outline. And that's also a reason why I'm a bit of a plotter, because I really want to make sure that I know how many books this is going to need so that I can set up sort of 3 acts per book and make sure there's enough plot beats in there, because that just works well for my brain. It also makes me a lot less anxious when I'm writing. It also means that I can find my flow a little easier because I know where the dots are connecting throughout. So I don't feel like I'm just sort of slogging through into nothing and hoping that it makes sense on the other side. That thought is horrifying to me. And I think
which
that
is funny because that's exactly how
learning.
That's just how Dawson leads. She's just slogging through and hoping the other side.
Yeah, she's like I
don't do that. She does that.
Precisely. She's just hoping for the best. She's really just rolling with the punches. So yeah, I knew the big sort of moments in Valley, but lots of the in between, I like to see what comes out, or I like to sort of plant seeds, and then I love editing. So a lot of the first draft is sort of just, throwing mud at the wall, seeing what sticks. And I like putting in lots of foreshadowing and then like forgetting about it and not actually have it lead anywhere. And so therefore in the editing process, I have to go back and sort of cull all that. Like, all the things, yeah, and all the things that I didn't actually use or didn't eventuate into anything else, I can cut all that out. But at least the structure's there, and then I can just work on the filling. So that's kind of how I do. I believe that would be called a planter. Something? Yeah. A planter?
I mean, it's a planter. And I feel like just about everybody, the planter, there are a lot of people who it's like, I would say there's like a spectrum between somebody who literally has the entire book and it's just, they're putting it down to words, but it already exists from every beat and every character
every scene.
Yeah, everything. And they're like, I just need, it's all up here and it's in bullet point. And now I just need to have it fleshed out. And then there are other people who are like, I just start and I don't know where I'm going. And I think most people are somewhere in between. Like I'm a lot closer to the I just start, where I have some vague ideas and some general things. And then kind of I see some farther things ahead and then start connecting things back. But the idea of being in book 1 and knowing what's happening in book 3, like, no, that does not happen for me. But I also can understand where if this was one book and then you're like, it's 3 books. So let's spread them all out. That makes that easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, only because I do this with every series. I start every single book that I write. I'm like, this is a standalone. No one get excited. It's a standalone. I just want to write one singular book and then have that story be done and then move on to a completely different story. And then it just never works out that way.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I think I flesh it out too much. Like I end up, it's really hard to do in fantasy, especially if you're writing high fantasy, because you flesh out this whole entire world, and trying to tell an entire story and do justice to it in one book is very, very tricky. But I love standalone fantasy books. Like I love reading them, so I always read one. I'm going to do something like that. That like, I'm just going to have a good, fun, silly old time in one book. And then I'm going to move on from it and pretend like that isn't my whole personality now. I cannot possibly.
Yeah.
So then it almost always turns into a trilogy, if I'm honest. So
I don't know if we should try
yeah.
reverse psychology for you, where you try to write a trilogy and then it only turns out to be one book, or maybe you so have the expansiveness to you. Maybe if we try to work you on like either a short story or flash fiction, it'll turn into a one book. Because I know some people who are like, oh, I'm going to write a short story, and then it's a book. So maybe that's what it is. You have to aim real small, and it's still going to get a lot bigger. And then I know people who underwrite who are like, how do you write an entire book? This is only 60,000. It's like just one word over the limit to not be a novella. So everybody's kind of in their different places.
Yeah, well, everyone's different, aren't they? My problem is definitely that I will overplot for the length that it's supposed to be. So yeah, I think if I tried to say I'm going to write a trilogy and hopefully it will turn out as a standalone, it won't. It will be 6 books instead of 3. Yeah, I think if I go with like I'm just going to write a poem.
It's a haiku, Stacey.
Yeah, if you limit me like that, I reckon I'll get it done in one novel.
In one novel, you're like, this is my haiku turn novel. It's still like a doorstop, but it's just one doorstop.
What a seller! Imagine if someone came up to you and said, "Do you like haikus?" Well, have I got the novel for you? What a seller!
So, tell me what the haiku is. Well, let me just tell you about it. It's this many lines. Well, not for me, it's not. But I do love that. That's like, you know how your brain works. So at least now, so you've got another series that you're working on. You've got one book coming out, and I'm assuming then you can actually say, I have the other 2 ready to go, or at least kind of ready, because doing that one opened the door to all of them. And it's not like, well, we'll see what happens with the next one. I'm hoping your editors are good with this and are not like, yeah, I don't care what you had for these later books. We're changing all of that. Because I know a lot of writers, we've had discussions in Discords about when you haven't sold the first book in something that's supposed to be a series, do you write the next book? Because there's always the worry that the editors are going to be like, by the way, I'm changing this secondary character is dead now, so you can't have them be the lead for the next book, or some other ridiculous thing. And I know that we like to think, oh, well, it's my book and we're going to do what the editor wants us to do ultimately. Do. So I'm assuming this first trilogy was with Angry Robot. I'm assuming no one made you do anything ridiculous like, okay, so all the main characters die in the first book, and it's like Ned loses his head and everybody's dead at the first book. You're going to have a whole new cast of characters for the second. No editor has ever asked for that, so that's probably fine.
I have been blessed with fantastic editors. So my editor at Angry Robot was Gemma, and there were other people who had their turn at reading a pass of the book and offering their suggestions and things. But my main editor was Gemma at Angry Robot Books, and we just had a really good relationship. That was my first editor relationship. So it was all very new to me, and I was terrified that the feedback I was going to get was, okay, thank you for letting us publish your book, but we are going to be changing this, and this, and we're going to be like reconstructing it into something that we imagined ourselves. It wasn't like that at all. She had a couple of good ideas, and to be honest, I just went, great idea, I should add it. And it was just a matter of adding in like this other element, and sometimes it can be something really small, but it just works. It was just like an element to a character's personality, or a quirk that you hadn't considered before, that she picked up on and thought, let's like expand on this, like let's use this because that's funny. So like let's make it continue on throughout the series, or this part of the lore is interesting, and so let's not just tell the readers what it is and then pack it away and never readdress it. Like let's use it. So often it's just conversations like that, which is my favorite kind of conversation to have with an editor, to be honest. With the new series, it's been a very different experience, but an awesome experience as well. So the next series is being published with Saga Press in the US. So I have a brand new editor, and it was sold in a preempt. So the book wasn't written yet. I just went, hey, I've got this idea. And I told them all the plot beats, and I said, I think it'll fit into 2 books. Would you like this duology? And they went, sure. And
is it a duology or is it a trilogy?
Well, I mean, officially, it's officially a duology. But is it actually a trilogy? Yeah.
We'll see.
So yeah. So yeah, no, I'm telling you right now that I cannot write this thing in 2 books, but it's not official yet. So we're just hoping and praying that Saga Press are agreeable, I suppose. But I have to write them the second book and show it to them before they can sort of make decisions on that. But my editor, her name is Amara at Saga Press, and she's been excellent. It's the experience just being different because it was sold in a preamp. So her and I got to sit down and have a conversation where I told her all my plot beats, and she went, "But what if this happened?" And I went, "Amazing! Let's add it to the plan." And then I kind of undid the plan and was like, "Hey, I went rogue, and I changed it a bit." But we got to things like. Yeah, we kind of got to pass like the mapping of the story back and forth a little bit first, just for funsies, because I was just really interested in hearing her take on it. And then once she was like, "Love that, that sounds great, can't wait to see how it all fleshes out," I kind of got to go away and tap it out and write it and present it back to her, along with like 17 different ideas I'd had along the way, So that was a completely different experience, sort of having those conversations from inception and then carrying them through and then passing them off to her. And then all of her ideas since in the rounds of edits that we've done. But I have yet to meet that brick wall between myself and an editor yet, where they say, "We think this should happen." And I say, "I don't want that to happen." And they say, "Too bad." Just for me personally, that has not happened. It's always been met with, "Do you like this idea?" And if I say no, and there's always a good reason why the author says no, right? It's because, well, what you don't know is that in book 2, this happens. And so that doesn't correlate. When you explain yourself, or when I've explained myself, it's always been met with an enthusiastic, "Got it, don't worry, like that one's off the table then, like let's move on to the next thing." So what I'm trying to say is I've never not gotten my way.
Because I've always
having said that,
to get my way.
Yeah, correct. But I am always willing to like compromise on that as well. So if the idea I know is good, there's usually a way I can incorporate it just in a different way. Or, they had this idea for this character, but I know that it's not going to work, because I understand the entire series, because it's in my head thus far, right? It's not in there. So they can be forgiven for not knowing. It might not work for that character, but I can make it work for a different character, or I can add another character in. So there's usually a way around that anyway. I think the editor-author relationship is all about, it's kind of like a marriage. It's all about compromise, So rather than being the brick wall, see if there's a way to work around it, or at least be able to communicate your decision thoroughly with them. It's on up. Yeah, I've had nothing but good experiences so far.
That's great to hear, because I have talked to authors where you find out, like, yes, they sold the book and then they had to completely rewrite so much of it that the point of like what they sold and what actually hit the shelves are 2 entirely different books that may or may not even share a title. So that's really great to hear that both places and both editor teams, they have different working styles. But again, you're right. When it's something where they already have a complete manuscript, revising is different than when you're still formatting it and going, well, what will it be and what do we want it to look like? Even if they don't know it's going to have 3 books. Haha. If Amara
surprise.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. Amara already knows. Because I went, hey,
because I
remember
feel
that time I said it was a duology? I was joking.
She's like, I didn't mean it anyway. Well, and I was going to say, I feel like there are more trilogies than there are duologies anyway. I feel like duologies are kind of rare. Like there's standalone and there's trilogies. And every so often there's a duology, but it's kind of the exception to the rule. So I feel like it shouldn't be a hard sell to be like, hey, more money, another book.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So, well, I guess it depends how the first one sells, because it's definitely a money game. But yeah, I do have a theory on this, and I think it's that usually we split up a story into 3 acts, and so if the story is kind of continuing across a series, then it's sort of easy to split that story into 3 books as well, That's why we often hear about like that second book syndrome, where they say the second book in a trilogy often has like, it feels like a bit of a lull in the story.
Yeah. the
so
sophomore
does the
slog
second act in all
sometimes.
stories,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the fun and games and the slog scenes. So I think that's probably why as well. Not that they have to be, or not that all books are, just why I think it's common. That's my theory.
Well, and I think it also depends on how the books are structured. And I like how with the Glacian Trilogy, especially, you really have three distinct settings for each of them. So it's like in each one, they continue from what was built up before, but at the same point in time, because you have new locations and sometimes new characters and everything, it's not necessarily a fresh start, but it's kind of resetting things. So you still have a beginning, middle, and end, rather than, oh, we're still slogging from what happened before, even though, as we said, Dawson, who is our beautiful Moses, who is leading people with her axe and through this area, not really sure where she's going, and they're like, can we go back, because I don't like this, and what, aren't we going over there? Are you sure this isn't where we're going? Yeah, there's some of that going on, but that it had a different feel to it than the story before. And then the story before that, again, also had a different feel to it, but all have these connecting points with the Iskra magic and these witches and these creatures, and what is it that they're doing and where are they getting their power and all of that. And you're continuing to expand on the lore. So you have kind of the best of both worlds with a development aspect, but also new things and new characters that we kind of see insights into. So earlier you mentioned like the artwork when you were describing it. Was that the art that you posted of Baltise? Was that it, or was there more art to come?
There's probably more stuff to come. This was more to do with creating a pitch deck for potential like foreign translation rights and film rights and things like that. So when your team, I suppose, in the publishing world goes about trying to sell the story for different things like foreign publication or for film rights and things like that, they may try to come up with a pitch deck, and in that pitch deck will be images, hopefully, so that they can illustrate the world for anyone who's having a look at it, just to make it seem more attractive. So it was more for that. Hopefully I'll be able, if it's any good, hopefully I'll be able to post it if I'm allowed to, after it's finished being utilized. But yeah, it was for less fun stuff as opposed to that. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to have lots of different pieces of, well, not lots, but a few pieces of artworks done, either because I've commissioned it myself or I've just had very lovely people want to make things. That's always very, very exciting. It still astounds me that people would put in the time and effort to do something like that just of their own free will.
It's because they love the characters.
Really incredible. Yeah. And I love that. And I love when people ask me if I have any artwork that they can have a look at, and I can sort of redirect them to all these people who have made it as well. That's always really fun.
So that's super fun. But you had shared one recently of Baltise, so I wasn't sure if that was one of them. So I'm like, oh, was that what it was? Because I don't remember the background too much, but it was very much like, hey, if Elsa's on steroids kind of thing, because she was
exactly. It was very Elsa-esque.
Yes. So I mean, I feel like there's definitely a space in the fantasy world for some more, I wouldn't say dark fantasy, but heavier fantasy that still has humor through it, but in a colder setting. So it's like, so let's get away from like the elves, and let's have these creatures. And by the way, you were talking about them as like half man, half bat, but you left out the sexy part because, you know, there's the sexy too. It's not just like they aren't always just a foil. There's that also. So I'm assuming, because this is a brand new series that you're working on, and that it will not have anything Glacian about it. Is there anything you can tell us? And are anybody sexy man bats or Batman? No, we're not going to call them.
No sexy man bats. It's actually, it's kind of so I would say that the Ledge series, the Glacian Trilogy, was, you know how there's kind of like a spectrum of romantic fantasy where we have like, is it more romance or is it more fantasy? I would say that the Glacian Trilogy was leaning towards the more fantasy side. It was definitely more plot driven than it was more romance driven. I would say that this new series that I'm working on is definitely more towards the romance side, just a touch, not too more. So there's that. It's a little spicier. It's focusing more on the main couple, I suppose. It's a kind of a gas lamp fantasy. It's a little steampunky. It's definitely set in a different era. Yeah. So it's definitely set in a different era. It's a high fantasy world. It's on a continent called Belvedere Trench, but it's very heavily inspired by Victorian England.
Steampunk
So
is, I think, legally required to be
which it tends to do. So it's definitely a completely different setting. The Glacian Trilogy was very medieval. This is not that. But I think a lot of my habits and my writing tendencies have followed me from the Glacian Trilogy into this one, as they tend to do. I love to incorporate shock and awe. I'm pretty liberal with killing people off at just, when it strikes my fancy. And I really like that. This one's probably a little more political. It's about a population of people who are split into a different class system depending on whether they're magical or non-magical. And it's about a rebellion that rises due to that. And it follows a girl named Nina, who comes originally from quite an impoverished mining town and who sort of goes through a very quick ascension into high society under a false identity. And to do that, she has to tell a lot of lies, but she also has to be very good and proper, and she has to bite her tongue and do what she's told so that she sort of isn't discovered. And she ends up being captured by the leader of the rebellion as a hostage once war has already broken out well into the future, and it ends up being her childhood friend, and a romance sort of brews between those two. And there's a love triangle as well. Actually, I've been corrected on this because apparently a love triangle is now considered polyamorous, meaning that all points
all
of
points
the love
connect.
triangle are all interested in each other. And I was like, oh, okay, well, it's not that. And they're like, that means that it's a V. It's a love V, meaning that the two male characters are both fighting and interested over the female character.
I didn't realize that love triangle had been redefined that way, because I always
it's very apparently there's political correctness now surrounding the love triangle.
I feel like there could be a new shape for that then, but I understand what they're saying. But did you grow up reading the Sunfire romances? Did they have those in Australia?
I didn't, but I did grow up reading a lot of love triangles, so I've always known it to just mean, two quarreling parties fighting over someone.
Two suitors, you got to choose one. But Sunfire, the reason I realized it probably wouldn't be there is they were all set in different points in American history, so they probably weren't shipping them down to you. But it was always funny because I realized after reading a bunch of them, like a good friend of the family, their eldest daughter had them. When she outgrew them, they just all got shipped over to me, and I just worked my way through them. And I realized after a while, the covers always had the same. They had the girl in the front. The books were always named after the girl's name. And there was always both men were on the front, but whoever she was with in the picture was whoever she didn't end up with in the book. So I'm like, the cover's a spoiler. Like, when she realized she's in this guy's arms, that means she's going to end up with that guy in the end. Like, maybe they should mix it up sometimes.
You worked out the formula.
It worked out the formula, but those are always triangles. So I didn't realize there are now V's, love V's, or just.
Well, I've just very recently been corrected on this. I'm talking like 2 days ago. I went, there's a love triangle in my new series, and someone went, oh, it's a poly book, and I went, nope. What do you mean?
Those guys are not interested in each other. Okay. Well, could they be? You're like, that's a different version.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, maybe in a fan fiction version.
Well, and I love the childhood best friend connection there and stuff, because I think that's a sweet thing that I like seeing. But even if the triangle is only a V, I'm excited about that. And just as a point of clarification, I am good with steampunk level technology. Like, that's like the level of technology I can handle, because there's no.
And it's me, like and I'm definitely not a genius. So the steampunk level of technology is still quite basic
for me. And I think the thing is, because it didn't really ever fully exist, it's like the whole fantasy aspect. It's like, how does this work? Well, by the humors and pneumatism. It's like, are any of these real? Nobody knows, and it's fine. But somehow that airship, which makes no sense, is flying, and everything has like the cranking gears and everything's shiny black and gold.
But that's what I kind of like about it, is that we're just like, but how does that work? And we're like, because of coal. Like, we everything we're like coal. Yeah, coal. It's powered by coal, and everyone just goes,
bad for our lungs. It's bad, but it's fun for
that's why it's so smoky. Yeah,
It's
fun.
like
Exactly.
it's from this. It'll be warmer than the Glacian Trilogy. That's for sure. But
It'll be way warmer.
were you using the Red Rising trilogy as a comp when you guys were pitching that? Because like the miners and like all that stuff, like that's like.
It's so funny that you should ask that, because I read the first Red Rising book, and I'm on the second right now, but I read the first Red Rising book literally last month, and was like, God damn. You know how every time you write something, it seems like
it's everywhere.
You hear echoes of it all around you. Even just like the title sometimes. Like we went back and forth on what the title of this book should be called for ages and ages and ages. And my original title for it was The Artisan, because I like short, simple titles. And romantasy doesn't really lend itself to short, simple titles most of the time.
They have a formula. That's not it.
Yeah. And I wanted to call it The Artisan because the magical people in this world are called artisans, and the people who are not are called craftsmen. So we have artisans and craftsmen. And
there's my 2 books.
Yeah, there's my, and I was that exactly. You get it. I was like, there's my 2 books right there, and they were like, no. So we went back and forth, and I offered there's alchemy in this book. So I'm like, what about like a something alchemy? And they were like, great, love that. Let's go with like A Forbidden Alchemy. So that's the name of the book. Since then, I've seen the word alchemy or alchemist everywhere. Like I have seen 20,000 different books with the word alchemy in the title, and I'm like,
no one noticed that first.
Yeah. And now that's just the way of it. And it's just because you're on the lookout for it as well, but also like the idea of mining. But we're dealing with fantasy. I'm definitely not covering any like groundbreaking plot points here.
But they're miners, so they should be breaking ground, like to dig deep. Oh, you didn't mean literally.
They are breaking ground in a literal sense. No, you were catching on to what I was saying. Like, I'm not doing anything metaphorically groundbreaking, but I am breaking ground with these characters in a literal fashion.
Well, and having read I've read the Red Rising trilogy, and then a couple of the ones that followed. I don't remember if I've read 2 or.
There's a lot. Yeah.
Well, I read the trilogy, and I don't think Pierce is watching this, but I kind of wish it had just stopped at the trilogy, because that was a good ending point, and then the other stuff
I usually feel this way when it comes to fantasy trilogies and then spin-offs, excluding Shadow and Bone, because I thought that Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom were decidedly better, that duology, but it was also separated a little from the main
and sometimes that makes a difference. Like if they're taking some elements in like same world but other stuff happening versus just continuing to drag on stories that have already come to a good conclusion. But yes, that's a different world in terms of there's no steampunk element to it, but it's just the miners and the oppressed classes, and like there we go. But I thought
it was a really stunning book. I loved Red Rising, and I'm in the middle of book 2 right now. But I thought it was incredible, and Pierce Brown definitely did a better job at describing what mining is than me, because I was like, I'm just a little Australian. They're digging. Look at them. Like, they're digging. It's really, really hard and sweaty. It's hard work.
That's how the mining thing works, I think.
Yeah.
But I do know like
very basic research.
But you know what though? It's also like if it's not plot dependent, you don't need to know every little thing about it, because no one's going to need to use this as an instruction manual to go out and actually mine, because that is not what it's for. Like that's nobody.
I think you do need to be purposeful on like how deep are we going with the research here, and is it like how much description is necessary. So I sort of did. I did in fact do research, but I also was very selective on how much description I was going to put in and how dependent the plot was on description. It just turned out the plot wasn't super dependent on like really hardcore like explanation on what's involved in that. So we went pretty basic on it, I think, but I like the balance there. And also I think we risk losing readers when we delve too deeply into those like other smaller factors and things like that. So that was a new challenge for me as well. That was a new challenge for me, because it wasn't just the mining aspect as well. It was the steampunk aspects, with the fact that like my main setting is a town called Kenton Hill, and it's the most extraordinary town in the continent, because it's hidden, it's a secret town, it's shielded from the rest of the continent. They've kept themselves kind of undercover, and they've made themselves completely independent by way of their steampunk inventions, you know. So trying to describe things like that and how they work was a challenge, because again, I didn't want to bog the reader down with like a slew of description on what the town looked like, but I also needed them to understand what the town looks like, you know. So it's fun to sort of take a character who much like Dawson in Ledge, when she's like leaving, she's left the ledge and she's traveling down to the valley, so you get to like describe what that all looks like with her as she's going through. Very much the same with my main character Nina in A Forbidden Alchemy, where she's traveling, she's in Kenton Hill for the first time, and so she's seeing all these things for the first times, and I get to describe it along with the reader as she's discovering them, and just giving her them base level description, because that's what she can see, and that's the level that she can understand it on, you know, and have very specific parts of it explained back to her by other characters who are in the know, rather than like delving super deep on like how all the cogs are turning. Because to be frank, I am not a builder. I'm not a carpenter.
You were a
I'm not an engineer. I'm not an engineer. And even I'm like, I don't really know how that works. I just know that it does, you know, because of coal.
Oh, it's cool.
And
well,
steam.
it's steam punk. And that's, I mean, that's the balance. And it's always good when you have this outside character coming in, because then you're able to explain to the reader the parts that are pertinent, the parts that actually matter, the parts that are going to be plot dependent, character dependent, but you don't need to know every little thing about how all this works exactly, unless it's going to come back to something that's going to be plot dependent or character dependent. Because otherwise you're like, again, not an instruction manual, and you don't need to have this be completely mapped out to the point where it's like, here's the blueprints of how we did it. It's like, this is based on magic. Remember, this doesn't actually, it can't. It's coal and magic, and that's it.
Yeah, I promise you that you're not going to be able to patent this and actually recreate it. Okay, it's not.
But that's my goal, Stacey. I wanted to go to patent. And they're like, how do you do this? I'm like, well, coal's not really used here so much, so it's solar now, and magic, solar magic. Yeah. I don't have that either, but it is true. Like if you start looking, like when you have something, then you start seeing it in other places, and then you go, okay. And I know, like, one of my things is whenever I find something that's similar, it's like, okay, now I have to read it just to make sure it's not too much like what I'm working on, or that I can distinguish mine in making sure that, okay, if they take it in that direction, make sure I'm not going there too. So it's like, on one hand, you want comps, but you don't want to be on top of them comps. You know, you're like, where are we different? And then when you have something completely different, then people are sending comps, and you're like, that isn't even close to what I'm doing. Thank you for playing, but I appreciate it, but it's still way off base. But that's fine. But I feel like there's always a demand for steampunk, and people enjoy that kind of stuff. So hopefully people will want 2 or 3 books in this series, and will be excited to get that.
Yeah. Well, I think also I've tried to make this, I love steampunk, but I've tried to make this like sort of accessible by way of its romance as well. So hopefully the readers who are maybe not as into it are sort of bolstered by the romance side of things as well. So hopefully it's
spicier. I mean, that's some spice. So I mean, how many?
Well, all 3. Well, I mean, I would say that Ledge, the series in general, is probably like 1.5 to 2 chili peppers, whereas A Forbidden Alchemy is probably going to be somewhere like 2 to 3. So there's not like a huge uptick in spice and romance. It's probably just more frequent. Because that's just what I felt like doing at that point in time.
Well, and it's funny because I remember I was recently talking to somebody about like the spice levels of my books, and I am like, I mean, it's hard to say because I know, like, for my first one, it's closed door, but there's explicit language. And I'm like, it's not like one of the books that I read that had literally a 25-page sex scene. And I'm going, that was just a lot. And I didn't read all that. And
25 pages is excessive.
It was one of those things where I'm like, well, it isn't exactly 25 pages because it was like 2 chapters back to back with that. And there was a little bit of dialogue in between, but it's like, Did you guys even take a break? Was there a snack break here? I want a snack break before I go reading the rest of this. This is a lot.
Yeah.
But it's also like it was a contemporary romance that's one of the most popular contemporary romances out there. So I'm like, but clearly no one was complaining. So you know, some of it's the author's choice, and some of it the readers are like, yes, we do want 25 pages of smut. Do you not have 25 pages of smut?
Yeah, and to be fair, that is in fact why they came to that particular book, probably. You know,
yeah. I mean, they may have heard about it.
And then, you know, there's a spectrum, as we said, there's a spectrum of romance, and sometimes it's just one end of the spectrum, and we all have our preference on that spectrum as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I find that one of the things about certain kinds is I know certain people who are like, I like romance, but I don't like the detail, like the graphic detail. And so they just kind of skim past that stuff. 25 pages is a lot to skim past. So there may be like a limit for some people where like, too many pages.
Correct. So, and that's where that particular book just won't be for certain readers, right?
That's true. But that one was super successful. So it was right for a lot of readers. So I don't think many people were complaining about it. Or I'll read something
Evidently
else.
not.
Serious. This is fine.
Yeah.
But I do think it's funny you mentioned the romantasy spectrum, because even just going, okay, I thought that the Glacian Trilogy was a romantasy, but I completely agree with your description of like it leans more towards fantasy in terms of like the amount, because it isn't just a romantasy. There is so much else going on in terms of, okay, it's a romantasy. It's not just a romance in a fantasy setting, but there is a fantasy plot where the main characters have a romance, which also is part of the action, their feelings for each other. But there's other pieces going on too, and other romances or people who love each other and things spurring their actions, like a queen doing something for her dying life that, you know, maybe wasn't something people should do. I'm just saying there were ethically gray questions brought up by lots of people in all those books. I'm just saying.
Indeed. Yeah, they all made some pretty poor decisions at some point in time.
Exactly.
Exactly as you said. It's the Glacian Trilogy was not. I like to see it as this. If you can look at the story and you can see the central romance and you can take the romance out and those characters are then not interested in each other, does the rest of the story still happen around that? Like, is the rest of the plot still churning? And if it is, then it's probably if that book wasn't romance dependent and it just had a romance in it. And I think that's what the Glacian Trilogy was. This one, if we take the romance out, a lot of the plot falls apart. And I think that's what makes it more romantasy as opposed to a romantic fantasy, if that makes sense. But there's been a lot of it's such a mouthful, and there's been so much chat around that topic lately about whether something should be sold as a romantasy or a romantic fantasy or a fantasy romance or a phantomance. I just made that one up.
I like that one.
Yeah, and sort of people, mostly entitled people, but people going, well, if you call it one thing, then it's misleading, and you know you're selling it under a false guise. It's like, I don't think anyone's trying to trick you into reading it. I think that maybe they just don't understand like how intentional you want them to be with that language. It's a fantasy with romance in it, or is it a romance with fantasy in it, or is it a even mix of the two? I don't know. Call it whatever you want.
It's hard, because I would also say that romantasy almost always is set in it's either an urban fantasy setting. So you're talking about things like the Sookie Stackhouse books, the True Blood. That's before even the term romantasy existed. But most of I feel like the romantasy now has been more primarily set in a high fantasy setting. And so,
agreed.
So if you write a fantasy that has a romance plotline in it, but it is not a high fantasy setting, there are probably people going, well, that's not romantasy, because they assume a certain kind of fantasy with it, which isn't actually implied in the title, because high fantasy is only one kind of fantasy. It's not the only kind out there.
Exactly.
But it is kind of dominates that subgenre. So we could go on about that. But honestly, I think there are people who, you're right, it's the entitlement of they have certain expectations, but as authors or publishers, the it's good to try to meet those expectations, because those are the people who then are like, I'm giving it 1 star because even though it was the best book I've ever read, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So 1 star. And those people are
and
like,
I don't want to have to do any of the mental labor to try and find a book that's right for me. I expect everyone else to find a book that's right for me,
and then tell me
it's
I
not
want
actually
it.
up to me. And then tell me, you figure out the book that I'm looking for, and then you present it to me and you tell me to read it, and then I'll be like, yes, this book was meant for me, thank you very much. There's definitely a certain amount of that, but also publishers are kind of beholden to that, like they don't actually have a choice but to try and pander to it.
I mean, they have, it's the following the trends and following like where is the reader interest right now. And so like there's a small romance bookstore in my hometown very close to me. Shout out to Heartbound, they are amazing. And they have it separated by like, here's the fantasy romance, and here's, this kind of romance, and they've got like Western romance and sports romance and contemporary romance. It's all separated. And I'm sure like there were a couple times I looked, I'm like, this is over here in contemporary, but it looks like it references a sport. Oh no, like, was there a decision made about where it needed to go? Or like, was it because this author mostly writes contemporary and so her readers expect her to have her stuff over here? And again, a lot of the stuff over in the fantasy side, I was like, okay, I wonder how many of them where they would fall on that spectrum of like, are they closer to one or the other? But overall, I'm assuming if it's in there, there's at least a good amount of romance, and otherwise they would be like, this does not belong here. This is Stephen King's The Stand. Why is this here? Like, get out of here.
Those poor booksellers and bookshop owners that are just trying to merchandise their stock. And but authors don't work like that. Authors don't work inside often. They're not writing in a pigeonhole. They have 17 different ideas in their brain at once, and they're like, I'm going to turn this into one book, and they do. And so there's a main character who plays hockey, but also he's a knight in the evenings after the sun goes down and the monsters come out, and the heroine is like a small town girl trying to make it in the big city, but also she rides dragons, and she's queer and he's queer, but somehow they end up together, and there's 17 other elements to the story. And so then the bookshop owner's like, do I put this in sapphic? Do I put this in sports? Do I put this? Is it a fantasy? Is it urban? I don't know. Is it
at that point
dragons?
they have to
Do I put it next to Game of Thrones and call it a day?
You have to buy the 7 copies for each category just to cover your bases and be like, you fit all of these. And if they are both queer characters, then I'm assuming we are back to a love triangle. Like
let's just go back. It's a poly book, so we'll just put it in the section for poly.
I don't know if they had a poly section, but
I imagine bookshop owners are just panicking on a daily basis.
They're like, what? What's the new trend?
They're just like, I cannot possibly make this many categories.
They made it work, and in this cute little shop. So shout out to them. And Stacey, you were amazing. How you were so refreshed on a Monday morning where I'm like fading on a Sunday evening. I'm gonna blame the time difference, but I'm so excited to read the new series when it comes out, whether it's 2, 3, or 300 books. Just you guys will figure it out. And so you have a standing invitation to come on back. And next time you're coming to the States, I found out you were going to a store like within an hour and a half's drive of me the day it was happening, and I could not make it work. So if you're coming to Los Angeles area again, preferably Orange County.
Oh, because I was at the Rich Bodice.
And I saw that like day of, and I'm like, I cannot get up there in time without childcare, because otherwise I'd be showing with 3 small children, and you'd be like, why did you bring the gremlins? And I'm like, sign them.
I would have adored the gremlins. But bugger, that sucks. Sign the children's foreheads. I would have too. That particular author event was very unhinged, so it's probably best that they weren't there, because it was definitely not PG rated. But alas, next time
you're coming to the States, like I would love to get to connect in person. Our agent was there.
That'd be amazing.
I was confused because I'd seen that she'd posted something about getting up super early, and for some reason I thought she was driving there. I'm like, you can't even get there from there in that time, but she was on a plane. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. Never mind. So Stacey, thank you so much for doing this. We're like at an hour, otherwise we'll just keep chatting forever and making up new genres and steampunk things and powering this show by coal. It's fine. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Vox is going to be back this Wednesday. We had rescheduled Nicole Bocat because she was supposed to come on the day after the election and things were unhinged. So we were going to wait. So she's coming this Wednesday. So join us this Wednesday, 11 a.m., 2 p.m. on this same channel with Nicole Bocat and Jennifer Ann Gordon. I will be here. And Stacey, go find Stacey's books. They're at Target, BT Dub, because I took a picture of them and I need to send them to you, Stacey. They only had the first two. So I'm thinking Valley was already sold out of my particular location. So look at your Target.
Well, Valley hasn't been released in paperback yet. So Valley won't come to Target until, I'm going to say, April. That's usually when we release the paperback overseas, and Target only sells paperback. So that will be
That's true. So look for the first two at your Target. If you're like, I need something to read while avoiding my family on Thanksgiving, just go grab those while you're picking up the sweet potatoes and go hide, because that's what this weekend is. For America, you guys, I don't think have something equivalent. Canada does theirs a month early. You guys have nothing like that? No, we're grateful.
No, we don't have that.
We're not grateful. Okay. Bye, Stacey. Thanks everyone for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and like and